everyone. This is Undisciplined and I'm back to the channel of mine, and I'm talking today with Beth Thomas, and I'll be honest about why I kept seeing, this pattern, brilliant designers, founders, creatives who are constantly fighting with their own brains. They're calling themselves lazy or undisciplined, when really they might be neurodivergent in a world built for neurotypical people. Beth specializes in ADHD and neurodiversity in the workplace, and she's not here to give us the corporate diversity training version. We're talking about doom scrolling, self-doubt, entrepreneurship, and with the ADHD, and how to actually build products and teams that don't assume everyone's brain works the same way. Beth, thanks for doing this, and welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much for having me. What an intro. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today.
So, how's your day going, Beth? And how's your brain today?
Great questions, and I love them. Yeah. And for me, I'm very, very grateful and blessed that I live in a world that I have engineered very consciously and compassionately to be built around my strengths. And that is exactly why I have more great days than terrible days a lot of the time, because certainly not always been like that. And life has been a struggle at times because I did not have that structure that enabled me to lean into those strengths and use them a lot more effectively.
That is true. So I've got to ask, do you ever have those mornings when, you open your laptop and, this beautiful plan for the day, and then 3 hours later you have recognized that your entire desk and research something completely random and haven't touched the actual work? And how do you cope up with that?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, look, I'm going to be honest and say less so now, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? It absolutely still happens, even though I might be a, quote, expert, I don't even love that word, but, a specialist in this field, doesn't mean that I have totally nailed the challenges I experience to the extent that they don't exist anymore. I'm just more aware of them and generally know a little bit more about what tends to work for me to manage that. But that being said, at various stages in my cycle, when I've got different fluctuations of hormones, especially, I can have really challenging days where I'm waking up and I'm honestly thinking, I don't even remember my name, let alone what my client load looks like this week. What am I doing? I haven't got a clue. So yes, I absolutely have those days. And for me, in terms of managing it, I suppose, is an unusual set of things, I'm going to say, because a lot of the time people expect me to say, oh, here's this strategy, here's this tip, here's this hack that's going to work for you. And actually, for me, some of the most powerful tools I've come to realize are the most effective: acceptance, compassion, being kind to myself, and rewiring the pathways that helped me change the narrative from, Beth, you are such an idiot, why on earth did you do that, to, oh, is that where we're at today, brain? Okay, cool. What support do I need?
Wow, that's true. So that's kind of, can we start from your journey? How did you get into this field, and how did you start it for neurodiversity, or even your background? How do you, even started, and where did you study, and how, the backstory of amazing Beth Thomas?
Yeah, of course we can. No problem at all. So I suppose if we're going to go way, way early back, why not? Let's give everyone the tangents and the side quests. So growing up, I was not obviously diagnosed. I had no idea about neurodiversity. I had no idea I was neurodivergent myself. Nothing in any of those years kind of gave any indications, even though I look back now and honestly, it's about as obvious as like a slap in the face, to be honest. So I look back and I think, how did I not pick up on these things? Or how did other people not pick up on these things? Because I have that language and understanding now that helps me to see it. However, I can also understand that back then we didn't really have that kind of language and that understanding. You know, girls didn't have ADHD. You couldn't be intelligent and neurodivergent at the same time. ADHD was an excuse for bad behavior. You couldn't be ADHD and autistic at the same time. Like, all of these biases and barriers existed, and quite frankly, stopped thousands of people like me from really understanding themselves. So I grew up as a very academically gifted, very capable individual with a lot of potential, which kind of became a little bit of a weight that felt wrapped around my neck most of the time, if I'm honest, because I had all of this potential constantly being told to me. And what it ended up creating was basically just savage performance anxiety. You know, this thought of, oh my goodness, I should be getting better grades. I should be better at this. I should be able to do that. And so that created a really harmful narrative that I used to beat myself with throughout later years. So on paper, I did exceptionally well. I'm not going to lie to you, Anas. You know, I got pretty much straight A's. I was a published poet before I even left primary school. I got my first GCSE when 2 years earlier in year 9, I think. So like I say, on paper, very successful. Looks amazing, right? How cool is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There was a huge disparity that I always feel it's important to draw attention to, because the cost of that was phenomenal. And I didn't realize it until a lot later on. So I really struggled socially. I was great at making friends. I'm great at speaking, hence why it's actually my profession now. But I was useless at keeping them, because I really struggled with things like being impulsive and remembering important things like friends existing and what was important to them. I would info dump thinking that that was a really caring thing to do because I was sharing something I was interested in, really excited, but someone else might have perceived that as me being really egotistical and really selfish with the time and the space, for instance. So we see this huge juxtaposition from a really early age that I know is not unique. I know because I did actually go on to work with a consultant psychiatrist for a few years who specialized in assessing ADHD. Come on to that in a moment. So that kind of very much set the scene for what I like to call very intense people-pleasing tendencies, right? Because I didn't ever fit in, yet I really wanted to. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of years trying to mend and augment myself to be more palatable, because that's what I thought would be more accepted, right? So we have this really interesting journey where in order for me to feel like I belonged, I was sacrificing what really actually made me me. But that felt an absolute price I'd be happy to pay in the moment. So we fast forward to university. I'm burning the candle at every single end possible. I'm in constant burnout cycles without even realizing it. But I felt at the time, I felt invincible, and I felt like I was thriving. I absolutely loved it. I was competitively dancing in squads. I was doing a full-time joint honours degree. I was manager in a cafe, I think partly because of the wages, but also because of the status for being able to think, gosh, yeah, I've made it. You know, I've achieved. That's incredible. Being one of the first in my family to go to university as well, there was an enormous sense of expectation that I was this completely capable individual, but still that narrative persisted. So by the time I left university, I was very lost, very confused, very conflicted, and very stuck. So by the time I moved back home, some of the plans that I'd had didn't quite work out in terms of the postgrad I wanted to study. So I took it as a sign. I moved back home and I started working in a gym of all places. Pass the time to also figure out kind of what I wanted to do next. And you know what? I actually loved it. It really suited me for a while because it was very stimulating. It was a very energetic environment. I really enjoyed the diversity. So I went from working reception all the way through the training qualifications. And then before I knew it, I was teaching 8 classes a week in all sorts of different things and really enjoyed my time for a while there. It was during that job that I met a consultant psychiatrist that I've just mentioned. And that was the start of everything else. So he was looking for an ad hoc PA at the time. And I said, well, I'm very chaotic in my own life, but I'm very good at organizing other people. So we went for it. We said, hey, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. And that was at the later end of 2019. And we all know what happened in 2020. So because of the lockdowns, I was furloughed from the gym. And so I had all of this extra time. And I thought, well, I can't sit still. What am I going to do with all that extra time? So the consultant wanted to expand, and expand we did. We went from the team of 2 of us into a team of 12, and I practice managed that for a while. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, it was great. It was a great experience to be able to bring together lots of different specialisms to create the vision that we had for this holistic pathway to support adults that were getting positively diagnosed with ADHD. And it was during that time, I'll never forget the conversation we had. And it kind of was this nonchalant, Sunday afternoon type conversation where I thought, gosh, isn't it funny that I'm really strongly resonating with everyone you're positively diagnosing with ADHD? And he looked at me and I looked at him. And he looked back at me. and we had that kind of pin drop moment. And I thought, no. Oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And that was pretty much the story of how I came to realize I was also neurodivergent. And that started.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. Wild, isn't it? Because most people, they either get diagnosed when they're younger, or it's something that, they pick up on because of a crisis point or a big life transition. But no, not me. It was a little bit different, a little bit weird, a little bit kooky, I suppose very neurodivergent, if nothing else. And I suppose that really led that pathway on to figuring out that for me, the solution was finding a way to combine everything I'd learned, all of the skills I had, and this lived experience I was just starting to make sense of into a profession that I could really get behind and nurture. And that led me to where I am today. So a few years later, I became a certified ADHD life coach. And then I made what I like to call bold and hopefully not foolish decision to quit my job and go it alone, because I had this vision of the way that I wanted to build some of the training and the coaching that just didn't quite align with the practice. So we went different directions, and here I am today, standing very, very proud of everything I've managed to create, with a lot of what the heck are you doing, Beth moments, by the way, don't get me wrong. It's not been all plain sailing. It's been phenomenal, and I wouldn't have changed it for a bit. So there you go. That's a little summary of my story and how I got to where I am today.
That's a very good story,
Thank you.
to be honest. And it was inspiring. It's inspiring. So you love what you do, and you have a mission. So that's amazing. You are doing everything on your own. That's even more awesome. I have not similar kind of story, but I started alone and, started my agency, a small agency, micro agency, that I wanted to help businesses in terms of design and consultancy. And, I kind of, challenged everything. I challenged every decision that I, made in the past decade. So yeah. And now you're saying is a 2020, the thing that shifted the whole world. It was 6 years ago. And time passes like this, and I feel like it's 1 or 2 years ago. Corona was just 1 or 2 years, and I feel like we're 6 years now. It's more than a half of a decade. I feel old.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially when you look back and go, "Oh my gosh, I did all these things in that time, and it still feels like last year. What is going on?"
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, Beth, let's see, there are people like, for example, I can lose hours, sometimes in not hours or maybe 1 or 2 hours, Instagram reels without even noticing it. And is that even ADHD thing, or is just modern life and apps breaking all of us and doing and wants to, addict to the platforms, or just there are some ways to diagnose those kind of, how do I say that? That you are you have some different mindset than other. I'm asking this not just for myself, for the audience, that if somebody is not can, maybe he has attention deficit or disorder, and then how do he recognize or even realize that this is happening to him, or what are the symptoms, or what are the things that he should be care of, so they might get help from outside?
Yeah, great questions. So I feel like it might be useful to spend a very brief moment clarifying a couple of terms so that it helps people in terms of giving them language that they can use to start getting curious. Because this is something that I see a lot of the time. And one of the, well, I suppose depending on your perspective, either liberating or frustrating things about what I do is that I'm not always going to have the answers. I can, however, facilitate the spaces for people to figure out the answers in a way that makes sense for them. And that is really powerful. So when we're looking at this, there's a few things that I believe often get a little bit misinterpreted because of the way that media sensationalize a lot of it. Perhaps we've also still got quite a lot of bias, lack of awareness, ignorance. All of these things are absolutely barriers. So when we're talking about neurodiversity, it's really important to be able to establish that the two key terms here, you've got neurodivergent and neurotypical. Now, these are socio-political terms. They're not medical terms. Anybody can self-identify as neurodivergent. And all that means is that whatever way in which they process, think, feel, experience, and live in this world diverges from the norm. And that's where you get neurotypical. So neurotypical is, again, a socio-political term that broadly refers to the typical functioning, processing, being, thinking, feeling that is generally described as being within the majority. So in any given time, in any given population, approximately 80% are neurotypical, 20% are neurodivergent. That's a lot of people. So it's not as infrequent as we'll think. Yeah. So out of any given 100 people, 20 of those are going to be neurodivergent, which means that in any given space you operate in, whether that's your family, your friend group, your workplace, public transport, wherever you are going to be in a diverse group of lots of different ways of operating best. So when we talk about neurodivergent, that is an umbrella term to talk about all of the different ways in which we diverge. Yeah, so that covers ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, PTSD. It covers Tourette's, tic disorders. So it's a really broad range of the different ways in which people can diverge from that norm. So then, if we understand that and start thinking about the question you asked, well, it looks different for different people. So I always encourage people to start by getting curious. What is the challenge? What is the barrier you feel that you're experiencing? Why is it a barrier? Why is it a challenge? And what are your expectations? Because we often think, oh, I should be different. I should be better. I shouldn't do this. But that's often where the thoughts stop, right? What exactly is it that you want to do differently then? If you don't want to be like this, how would you do things differently? So what we're then doing is getting curious and starting to build what is called our metacognition, our sense of self-awareness, how we're doing in the moment, our understanding of ourselves. being able to check in with ourselves and what unmet needs we might have in the moment. And all of these things could well be contributing factors to us experiencing those barriers. So that's a lot of coach speak. I'll give you a couple of examples if that's useful. How about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was about to ask if you can give us an example.
Of course I can.
Thank you for that.
So as an example, I think you briefly mentioned the kind of the doom scrolling, for instance. So what exactly is the challenge? That you are doom scrolling and not getting your work done. So does that mean that you're struggling with your focus and your attention? Or does it mean that you're struggling with your task initiation, for instance? And so you are doing something to avoid / procrastinate, for instance, not doing the thing that's important. So that could be a whole host of different executive functioning related challenges. But there's that famous phrase that to understand, what is it? If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. I can't remember who said it. I'll find out because it'll annoy me and I'll...
Einstein. I think Einstein.
Okay, absolutely.
I think Einstein said that.
Maybe it was, yeah. So that is really poignant here, right? Because it means that there is so much importance in really actually defining what it is we've got going on before we even know what's going to be useful. And then we want to experiment with solutions so that we can really find out what works and what doesn't, because the solution is different for different people. So, for example, with the doom scrolling, are you doom scrolling because it's giving you a dopamine hit? And so it's really easy and gives you that level of input that means you're going to want to keep doing it. Are you doom scrolling because the other work you have to do feels too overwhelming? And so is it overwhelm that we need to explore and manage and find a way to deal with? So do you see how being able to define exactly what the challenge is helps to guide towards the solution that might work? Because, like I say, it's different for different people. The solutions to help manage overwhelm are going to be very different to the solutions to manage task initiation, for instance.
Okay. So, for example, let's take the doom scrolling example.
Yeah.
If I am, per se, is procrastinating the task that I should complete, or I think the core is self-awareness and being understand how you are behaving and why you are behaving, and then try to understand you are delaying that you if you want to start something, or you want dopamine hit or something, and that's becoming an addiction, because that's all big. A person can understand by being self-aware, and self-awareness can be achieved by self-reflection, I guess. I think to every day think about how's the day going, and how was the day, and what you did good, what you did wrong, and what was the problems that you faced today. Would you say that would be a good strategy, or is there something else?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because self-reflection is a really, really powerful tool. And without having that, it would be very difficult, at least in my observations, to sustain any kind of strategy, right? Because how are you going to know if it's working, or indeed not working, if you're not checking in with those questions?
Yeah.
So you've got to have that.
That's true.
To be able to know the answers you're looking for. So absolutely, self-awareness is really important, and it's a huge skill that a lot of coaches out there are trained to help you develop, because it's not necessarily something that every single person has innately within them. And that's really understandable, because we don't really live in a world that nurtures that. We live in a world that nurtures compliance and functionality within a very rigid set of expectations. So the minute that you don't fall into that, you are suddenly problematic, or broken,
Yeah.
and that becomes a problem to be fixed. So that creates a lot of pressure and really harmful narratives that prevent people from being aware and kind to themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that. And world is so much getting faster day by day, and you don't even get the time to think and self-reflect and understand this, what you're doing, why you're doing, asking questions to yourself. That why? At least I think the most important question is why you are doing what you are doing.
Yeah.
Because that's how I find myself, and still trying to self-reflect daily. What helped me recently in the past 6 months, and I'm going to make another video for that. But that's self-reflection and doing that by daily journaling. Daily journaling helped me out in stress and taking what's there, writing it down, and it just magically I'm stress free somehow, because I wanted to let it out and I write it down, and it helps me out a lot rather than I used to think all the things that are in my head. So I don't know, it just helps me out. Do you do daily journaling or something that sort?
For sure, yeah. I find journaling is very, very powerful, and I also really enjoy being able to help people understand that journaling does not have to be in that traditional written format. So what I've found when I've been working with clients is that they can understand the value of something like journaling, but the concept of having to write is potentially a barrier for some. Maybe they're dyslexic or dyspraxic, and so that creates a barrier towards using it in that format. Or maybe they have a perfectionist narrative that tells them, well, you have to do it perfectly every single day, otherwise you're a failure. And so if they don't do that, they feel like a failure, and so they never start. So one of the really powerful things that I love being able to encourage people to get curious is, okay, how do you process information best? What works best for you? Go do that. Because a lot of people I've worked with are actually very strong verbal processors. And a lot of people don't realize that you can journal in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't have to be writing. It can be writing. You can write in a notebook. You can type in a document. You can send a voice note to yourself. You can do a movement journal if you express your emotions through your body more comfortably. You can talk to somebody. There are so many different ways that you can access something like journaling as a tool so that you can indeed process what would have otherwise been a lot of very spiraling, potentially catastrophizing thoughts. So, yeah, I think it's a really powerful tool, and I've seen it be really useful for a lot of clients.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is.
And I don't know why I started it. I mean, like, obviously I know why I started it. It's just these things help me out in life, and I think it's because of I am still learning a lot of stuff. I am reading books, so that helps me out in putting all thoughts in a very well-mannered way and understanding the thoughts and putting my thoughts together. So yeah, that's very true. That's helped me out in journaling. So what do you do, by the way, when these things happen? Like, if you are using Instagram, if in case that you caught yourself, like, you're scrolling for 20 minutes and you realize, oh, so what's your move in that kind of scenario? I want to know, because as a coach, what you do.
Don't call me out like that. No, I'm joking.
I'm just kidding.
This is a great question, and like I always say, I will always caveat it with saying you've got to find out what works for you, and figuring that out. I very much encourage you to think about your own interest-based nervous system and how to align your values and your motivators so that any of those strategies feel easier. So if I find I'm getting caught and stuck doing something like doom scrolling, I first recognize it and I will try to be as kind to myself as possible. Doesn't always work, you know, occasionally still might have that fleeting self-critical thought, but I can catch it much quicker and I can be kinder to myself. And rather than approach that with a level of judgment and criticism that makes me feel even worse about myself and then just makes me carry on doing the thing, I approach myself from a curious and compassionate angle by saying, okay, we're here. Why is that? What is it I need right now? And how can I help myself to get it from perhaps a healthier source? So that looks different in the situations I might find myself in. And the solution to breaking it for me often looks like breaking it down. So because I definitely still like to describe myself as a recovering perfectionist, I often have to break things down so that things feel a lot more manageable. And then I tell myself I'm going to put it in a beta testing phase so that it's no possibility of getting it right or wrong. The only outcome, which is a win, no matter what, is that I'm going to gather data to let me know whether it worked or not. So as an example, I might be stuck doom scrolling and then I'll say, right, I need to shake my hand or something just to break that cycle, break that physical pattern I'm in. So I'll try that. Okay, that worked that time. Great, cool, wonderful. Right, I'll stick that in the toolkit. Maybe that doesn't work for me sometimes, and I might have to try and do something like give myself a timer instead and say, right, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to shift to something else. So it's about trying different things. And for me, novelty is a great motivator. A lot of what I do generally tends to have to feel quite new and interesting so that I'm going to stick at doing it, which sounds somewhat ironic because how can you stick at something if it's new, right? But the question I'll ask myself is, how can I make that transition feel new and shiny so that I can access it, or I can put myself through that transition to pull myself away from it? So those are some of the things that I've tried. And for me as well, I would say one of the most effective strategies, if you will. One of the most effective strategies is reducing the risk in the first place, which I know a lot of people might be like, well, it's easier said than done. And you're totally right. It absolutely is. Sometimes you fall into whatever it is you're doing, and that's okay too. But if I try as hard as I possibly can to mitigate the risk of it happening, that for me is really, really useful. So I have maximum timers on my phone, and I generally try really hard to make sure that if I hit those timers, I'm not then re-entering the app, because it will shut me away from the app and I won't be able to use it. I also put my apps, especially the ones that are likely to distract me the most, into folders so that I can't overtly see them, so that it's harder for me to click on them the minute I'm opening my phone. So that's another thing that helps, because it's adding more steps into the process. And then my brain's like, oh, gross, I don't want to do that, so I won't. And the other thing that I also find really useful is to put focus modes on my phone throughout the majority of the hours in the day, so that I'm not getting any notifications ping up. Because again, if you think about it, I've just said that novelty, new and shiny, is a big motivator for me. That can go both ways. So the minute I'm getting a notification, I'm like, ooh, I want to look, what's that notification? I don't want to do my work. Who wants to do their admin? Who sits there and goes, oh, I love sitting in my inbox. Yay. No one wants to do that. But everyone wants to look at their notifications or whatever new, shiny, interesting thing has entered their world, if that's what sparks their nervous system. So I will try and, again, reduce the risk of that happening to derail me. So, yeah, those are some of the things. Don't know if that's useful.
Yeah, that's very useful. I'll try some of that. I have one thing that I do when I use. No, this is the first one. I think you said it. I put timers on the apps, like for Instagram, Facebook, And what it is, after 2 or 3 minutes, the app will close. It's not just going to into the homepage, but it'll close the app. So whatever I'm watching will just get closed. So if I open the app again, it's gonna restart everything.
Yeah.
So it irritates me, and then I don't open the app. So that helps a lot.
Oh, that's genius. That's brilliant. I don't have a timer that will cut me out within that space. That's brilliant. I might have to steal that. It's a great idea. I have a timer. I think it's like 45 minutes in the day or something like that. So the minute I hit that daily max, it cuts me off and I'm like, fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't do that, and it's very good. And the credit goes to my friend. His name is Samir. You can call him Sam. He told me this trick. He used to do this, and I was like, one day he was using his phone, and suddenly his app just got closed, and I was like, what the hell happened? It was like, don't you know about you can do this in your phone? Oh, that's a cool strategy, man. I'll steal it too. So you can steal it from me, and it goes worldwide.
Love that. Yeah, shout out to Sam. I'm definitely going to go with the bank of recommendations. But that's why I love working with my clients, because they are the most creative, resourceful people that come up with the most brilliant ideas for things. And that's why I always say, I'm not going to have the answers on what works best for you. You are the expert on you. I can give you the education. I can create the space. I can, sometimes even make suggestions, but there's absolutely no guarantee that they're going to be the suggestions that work for you. And that's, for me, so exciting. Mm-hmm. It's frustrating sometimes when the client wants a solution. I respect that. Sometimes people just want to know what works. So that's where that level of curiosity and compassion comes in, because we've got to have that level of lateness and think. Otherwise, we're going to struggle to find those solutions that work for us.
That's true. What do you think about imposter syndrome? Does that happen to you? Because that happens to me, and I think in tech world it's very common, and I get to know many people are saying that they are not good enough, but I know they are fucking awesome and they are doing great jobs. But I myself feel like sometimes imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough, or am I even like, why would someone pay me that much? But at the same time, I do the job. I have expertise in that, and I know I can do that when I sit on the laptop with the focus mode on. But sometimes it just happens. So, what are your thoughts about it? How do you think about it? Do you have this kind of feeling?
Absolutely.
Like that?
And I always say that everything I do is grounded in lived experience. So the majority of the time, the answer is going to be, yes, I completely get what you're saying, because I've been there myself. And that, for me, is a really special way in which I can connect with the people that I work with, because they tend to feel so isolated or embarrassed or ashamed of some of these experiences, because we might have surface level conversations about stuff like this, but, do we really have those vulnerable conversations about what that actually feels like on the inside a lot of the time? I don't think so. Not much, especially not in workplaces. So yes, I absolutely experience imposter syndrome. A little bit less so now, because I've worked very intentionally and patiently and consistently on building up the belief that I have in myself. And that leads me, I suppose, in a way to talk about one of the most powerful ways to work with that. So in my training and my experience, these kinds of beliefs, perfectionism, internalized ableism, imposter syndrome, we often see them as an enemy, right? Like, oh gosh, this thing's holding me back. It sucks so bad. Okay. But may I offer a different perspective? Our nervous system and our brain is built to keep us surviving, right? It only wants us to live. So what I find fascinating is that somewhere along the way, the belief that is holding us back developed as a safety mechanism. So imposter syndrome, for example, is trying really hard to keep you safe, but it's just not really serving you anymore. And so it might be that that level of imposter syndrome is keeping you safe because somewhere along the way you learned that being visible is equal to being rejected or criticized or ridiculed, for instance, right? And that stuff hurts. We don't want to feel those things. Like, who wakes up and goes, oh, I really want to be rejected today? That sounds like fun. So our system is going to take that data and say, right, well, that sucked. Let's definitely not do that. So imposter syndrome, therefore, or perfectionism, for instance, has developed very cleverly as that safety response to keep us safe from those things that feel dangerous or threatening. So when we look at it through that way, I actually think that's quite magic in an odd way, because if we can then approach it from that perspective and say, oh, actually, it's this part of me that's trying really hard to keep me safe, but it's just not quite caught up to the fact that I've got this and I can do this and I'm good and I'm all right. And that is a real game changer for a lot of people. Maybe not everyone. Not everyone's going to resonate with that. That's okay too. But it can definitely be really powerful, because rather than continuing that internal war you're waging against yourself, you can practice that level of self-compassion. You can ground yourself and practice those regulating strategies and build that level of self-confidence within yourself, which helps to alleviate the impact that imposter syndrome is having on you. What are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, that was very beautiful. And I think, that's very accurate. I think everyone who listened to this would find beautiful, and they understand this. They would understand this. So that's amazing. So, as you work with, professionals and entrepreneurs, maybe have you worked with entrepreneurs? What's their behaviors like, and ADHD or neurodivergent people in entrepreneurship? What's your experience with them, and how do you think it's good for them? Or I think I have seen some people in my life that they are amazing at vision and terrible at executing any task. But some others are, some others are hyper focused but build incredible products, but cannot manage a team meeting. So is there a type or something? I mean, everybody is different, obviously. So is there any categories for that? Or
good question. I'm not sure so much if I would use the word categories, perhaps. I suppose it depends on the models you're looking at. But for me, I would say this is an example of spiky profiles and strengths. So what spiky profiles refer to are the arguments that neurodivergent people in particular have very strong strengths and areas of significant challenge. Whereas in comparison to a more neurotypical system, they will have a more linear, less sharp profile. So kind of that whole jack of all trades, master of none type theme. So a neurotypical system is going to be a bit more linear, but perhaps not have the significant peaks and troughs, making them like that kind of good all-rounder, let's say. Whereas a neurodivergent system might have those real areas of, significant strength, and that is complemented by the areas of challenge. So where we then see that play out in terms of entrepreneurship is that entrepreneurs really are the visionaries. They're people that see a solution to a problem and they try to bridge that gap, right? So if the entrepreneur, the neurodivergent entrepreneur, is working strengths aligned, and they have created the scaffolding and the systems around them to support those areas of challenges, they're flying. They are absolutely smashing it at a phenomenal rate. If, however, we have neurodivergent entrepreneurs who might have this similar type of profile and situation going on, but their scaffolding is a little bit shady at best, then the likelihood is that they're going to be draining a significant amount of their energy trying to cope and compensate for those challenges, which is keeping them away from really leaning into those strengths. So what we want to be doing for those entrepreneurs is helping them to identify, right, where are your strengths? What are they? How do they complement to the solution that you have designed or built or developed? And what are the challenges you have? And rather than focusing on the deficits and coping with those, what support can we put in place so that you can just focus on your greatness? And that's where we see that really powerful shift. And the outcomes are significantly different. So that's why it's so important to work strengths aligned and also to use acceptance. We're not going to be perfect at everything. That is not the design of a human being, right? So if we can let go of the things that we're not strong in and think, do you know what? That doesn't make me a failure. That makes me human. It makes me really good at this stuff, less so at this stuff. Then that's powerful. I'll give you an experience example. I am brilliant with people, with words, with the human connection, with movement, all of these beautiful things in life. I don't have a strength in numbers. I wish I did. And as you show me a spreadsheet and it is a different language to me. And I love that other people love a spreadsheet. I wish that I could love a spreadsheet. I've seen some of the most magnificent spreadsheets that look very complex. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. But honestly, I take my hat off because,
work of art.
Work of art. Yet, if you sat me down and said, right, you've got 2 hours, you need to whip up a spreadsheet with these equations, you would come back in 2 hours and you'd see me probably curled up in a ball, crying with a broken computer next to me that might be on fire. And that's because you're not strength, okay? And if I spend all of my time focusing on the fact that I'm not strong in numbers and trying to improve that, I would lose out on all of the incredible things that I can do in other spaces. So if I can accept that my strength is not in numbers and I can outsource, I can delegate, I can create systems, I can put in place tools to help me navigate that opens up so much space for me to focus in on what I'm really good at. And that is one of those messages I wish more people understood more, because there's such an expectation and a pressure for us to be good at everything all the time, all on our own. And I think so much potential.
And
no, go ahead. I'm just waffling at this point. You go.
Yeah. So I have seen, and you might know all of them, there are big entrepreneurs out there in the world, billionaires like Elon Musk, Devil Nealman, Barbara Corcoran, and Richard Branson from Virgin Group. There are some they have dyslexia or have some ADHD version of them, and they are doing very well in the life. And I get very inspired. I think they are very, smart, and they know what they're doing, and they're very dedicated, and they think long term. The intense drive, and they're revolutionary. For example, I know people would disagree, but Elon Musk is one of the biggest, billionaires and entrepreneurs out there, and who is, I think I have read somewhere, but yeah, he has some issues, but he's doing great. So there is nothing stopping you until you make decisions for yourself that you will do this, and this is why you're an entrepreneur and you want to do this. That's drive them. That's what was my point, that you can do, even if you are suffering or doing something that feels that stopping you, but that's also making you go forward. I think that's how it is. It is how the world works. I have I'm very fascinated by this, that there are a lot of people, a lot of great entrepreneurs that have some sort of ADHD or OCD or something like that. So I'm like, okay, it's amazing. People doing things in the world, even though they know they have this, and they make their weaknesses their strengths.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
Absolutely. I think there's certainly an overlap between the strengths and features of neurodivergent profiles and the qualities that entrepreneurship requires. So I think that helps us to understand why entrepreneurship generally tends to increase someone's likelihood of being neurodivergent. And the same can be said for certain other industries as well, like performance, creative, and tech-based industries are also quite likely to have a higher prevalence of things like neurodivergency. But there's also one thing that I really want to add to what you've just said there about sort of some of those bigger names. And the other thing I would love to add is privilege. A lot of those names that you've shared have an enormous amount of privilege, and that can also be an incredible game changer when it comes to how people perceive their differences. If you're in a place of privilege where you can get that level of support that I was just talking about, and from an early age, you don't have to, or you're less likely to struggle with things like ableism, that absolutely is going to give people a major leg up. So if there are any entrepreneurs out there, listening to this podcast and thinking, oh man, yeah, absolutely, Richard Branson's an amazing inspiration, but I'm not him, then take that as an opportunity to be really kind to yourself, because there is a marginal percentage of people that have that level of enormous privilege to bear in mind, and
privilege
is something to think about and to not use as evidence to beat yourself with that shame stick, because the majority of us aren't that way inclined in terms of the privilege. So just something I'm always really passionate about adding, because otherwise sometimes we use that as a measure, right? To be like, oh, well, clearly I'm not doing good enough. But if you see it as an inspiration, that's fantastic, as long as it's not something that also makes you feel bad about yourself.
That's true. And especially people who are not privileged in the third world or underdeveloped countries, and they have these problems and they struggle, and I see. And obviously the system is not that capable of catering all those people. And obviously there are the issue with awareness. The biggest problem is awareness. The people don't even know that this exists and this is a problem. So that's very true. The privilege is a big part of this.
Really is.
Yeah. So I'm a product designer. Okay. So, when I design things, I'm supposed to think about accessibility and contrast and how people perceive screens, and create the best user experience for the interface. So nobody, taught me that how to design for ADHD brains or neurodivergent brains. Can you help me out a little bit of help? If I'm designing something and I know my audience is going to, like you said, there are 20 people out of 100, they are, experiencing these issues. So how do I make my user interfaces or designs that will maybe help them in terms of understanding the screens, understanding what's going on the screen? Is there anything that you can help me out? So I would maybe take care for the next thing, whatever I develop or design.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything?
I will add that it's certainly not my particular niche. There are some incredible consultants out there who specialize in doing exactly this. And I would definitely recommend teaming up with people like that, especially if you're going to work on bigger projects, and encourage people to really think about that element, that user experience from all different, demographics. I think that will be really useful for you in terms of collaboration. So that would be probably my first suggestion. Then in terms of, I suppose, things that I might suggest based on either my own experiences or a blend of that in addition to client experiences, it would be to simplify any experience and make sure that it feels cohesive, so that the user is not having to do anything overtly complex that is going to create a really confusing and conflicting experience. So mean what you say and say what you mean, and make sure that that is followed through in absolutely everything that you do. So there needs to be that level of cohesiveness and simplicity that help make that experience really accessible. There are certain fonts and certain colors to be mindful of in terms of them being easier to read as well as easier to spot, because you've also got other things to bear in mind, like dyslexia and, for instance, color blindness to consider in terms of those aspects. I would also suggest other accessibility features. So you can do things like offer adjustments and have different contrast settings available for people to personalize on their screens and stuff. So you could help create that as an option for people. You can change the sizing of everything. You can also offer things like audio accompaniments, for instance. So you could consider embedding an audio description of things to make that easier as well. And I suppose, like I say, ultimately it's really thinking about that simplicity. So making sure that your user isn't left guessing anything. So be super clear, be super engaging, and really think about the end result that you want that user to have. What is that journey that you want them to go through? How do you want them to think and feel and experience that site or that interface or whatever it is you're building? And consider any of the possible barriers that might get in the way and make sure you're removing those so that it remains as simple and effective and cohesive as possible. I think a lot of people tend to think that because neurodivergent, well, particularly ADHD profiles are quite chaotic, that you want to see something chaotic to represent that. That's not necessarily always the case. That might actually add to the dysregulation, if anything. So yeah, constantly thinking about how can I make this really impactful in the simplest, clearest possible way. And that'll be my answer. Thanks.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for that. And bring me those people who can help me or help my like obviously, like I would love to. I am that kind of a person who never take a second guess or second opinion. Like if there is something to learn about, I'll learn openly, and I wouldn't even unlearn and relearn anything that would make me better person, and that from myself somebody could benefit off, like somebody can get benefit from me. I'm always open for that. So you work with tech teams or especially I'm asking tech teams because my mostly audience or mostly people that I know that they are mostly in tech. But the reason I'm asking is this, that if you can ban one thing from tech companies, how tech companies work or operate, one meeting type, one tool, one practice that you think, what would make the biggest difference for neurodiverse people to experience this in a much better way? There's some things, always there are things there in the world that you want to avoid or you want to ban. So you might have some suggestion, because I am running small company, so that would help me in terms of improving my company and being more inclusive.
That is a great question. Woof. Just one thing. Oh, we'll be here all night otherwise. Okay, I've got it. I would ban assumptions. Everything I say is always underpinned by, and every person's different. So I would ban any assumptive processing that lands on, oh, this must be the solution for this person because X, Y, Z. So if you have a tech team and you have a variety of people within that tech team, do not assume that the solution that works for one of them is going to be the same across the board. Consult with them, collaborate with them, create psychological safety so that your team feel comfortable to talk with you about what works best for them without fear of judgment or ridicule or embarrassment or shame, etc. And allow them to guide you. And that will be the most sustainable and effective way of creating an environment and processes and strategies that get the best out of your team, right? Because you might get someone that works better in their own space at home. So allow flexible working because that's a thing that really helps them. You might then have someone across the pond who actually works better with that sense of collaboration. So they need to be in an office environment for that sense of accountability. So the person who needs to work home is not going to do the same level of work in the office as the person who needs to be in the office and not working from home. Yeah. So then you have two different people that might have the same neurodivergent profiles, but needing very different things to be able to operate best. So find those individual requirements and do your absolute best to nurture them. Of course, you're not always going to be able to get it perfect, fair enough. But again, the aim is never perfection, right? So collaborate and give those people the space to figure out the solutions. Like I say, rather than assume you know the answers.
That's nice. That's amazing. I think I am done with the questions. And if you want to tell me something that will help us out, tell my audience, tell your audience, because you are going to share this podcast with your audience as well. So if you want to tell something, and also let them know where people can find you if they want to keep learning from you and what's the best way to reach you out. And because I know, there are people who is going to be differences. We don't, the way you say it right now, that I know ADHD folks often have a strong preferences about, emails and DMs and carrier pigeon.
I would. If someone wants to send me a carrier pigeon, I'm very impressed. I am terrified of pigeons, so I'm probably going to run away from it. But I will still be impressed that you managed to send me a carrier pigeon. So I would say. What do I want to end with? That's a great question and ask. So I suppose for me, it's just really emphasizing that curious and not furious approach. Because if we are sitting there feeling stuck, chronically exhausted, burnt out, misaligned, frustrated, then the solution is not to add more of that, to expect less of that in the outcome. So we really want to be trying to create that level of curiosity so that we can try and figure out what any of those types of solutions or differences would look like. And to that extent, I would also perhaps say that there is a very big difference between being difficult and having a difficult time. So if any of those narratives do start setting in and you're giving yourself a hard time, it's more than likely you're probably having a difficult time. So that's another indication that it would be very wise to perhaps take a moment to pause and check in with yourself, practice some regulation, and get curious about what unmet needs you might have in that moment so that you can figure out what works for you. And that will be a much more effective strategy than just being really mean to yourself, which is often what I see people do more. So I suppose that would be my final point to encourage people to do. And if anyone does want to get in touch with me and they do want to chat any more about any of the stuff we've explored today, I'd be more than happy to do that. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. I think my links, I assume, will probably be in the show notes, won't they? And I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can also use my LinkedIn profile to go right ahead and book in a call with me so that I can listen to you and we can see what you need from there.
Awesome. That's beautiful. And thanks, Beth. That was this was an amazing discussion and mind-opening discussion for me and for my audience. And thank you for your time because I feel very, what's the word for this? I don't know. I'm looking for the word, but I'm very grateful that you are here and give your time to us.
Well, when you talk about the podcast and what it is you're trying to achieve, I was absolutely delighted to get behind that and support you in any way that I could. So we need more people like you doing the things that you're doing. It's great.
If you guys have any questions, right, you can comment down and ask Beth questions. She can reply on YouTube, or we can make another podcast if it's very deep questions. And I would like deep questions.
Brilliant. Really cool. Thank you so much.